All right, let's dive into something pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Something you do every second of every day without even realizing it.
Let's hear it.
We're talking about cellular respiration.
Oh, cool.
It's how our bodies turn food and air into, well, energy.
Right.
The energy for, everything, thinking, running, even just keeping our hearts going.
It's pretty fundamental.
Totally. Our sources start with this analogy of a skier
Oh.
racing down a slope, burning energy from food.
Yeah. I like that.
So just like that skier needs fuel, so do our cells.
And oxygen. Don't forget the oxygen.
Right, of course, from the air we breathe.
Right.
But how does that food and oxygen actually turn into energy our cells can use?
Well, the energy isn't just floating around.
Right.
It's stored in a molecule called ATP,
ATP.
adenosine triphosphate.
Okay, so ATP is like what, the cell's energy currency?
Exactly. Think of it like a rechargeable battery.
Okay, I can see that.
It's got these 3 phosphate groups, and when one breaks off, energy is released.
And the cell can use that energy.
For anything it needs to do.
So breaking that bond in ATP is like spending energy, right? But how do we even get those ATP molecules in the first place?
That's where cellular respiration comes in. It takes the energy from glucose, which is a sugar,
right,
and turns it into ATP.
Got it.
And most of this happens inside the mitochondria.
But the mitochondria.
You know them.
Yeah, the powerhouses of the cell.
Exactly, like tiny factories churning out energy.
So we got the fuel, the energy currency in these tiny factories. But cellular respiration itself, that's a pretty complex process, right?
Oh, it is, yeah.
With multiple phases.
Absolutely. There are 4 main phases.
4?
Like acts in a play.
Okay.
It starts with glycolysis.
Okay.
Then the transition reaction. Then the Krebs cycle.
Krebs cycle.
And finally, the electron transport chain.
Wow, a 4-act play. So Act 1, glycolysis, let's start there.
All right, so you eat some food, and your body breaks down those carbs into glucose.
Yeah.
Glycolysis is the first step in breaking that glucose down further.
And this happens outside the mitochondria, right? In the cytoplasm.
That's right. It's the only part that doesn't need oxygen.
Oh, interesting.
So during glycolysis, the glucose molecule splits in half, creating 2 pyruvate molecules.
So is that where the energy is released when it splits?
Some ATP is produced, but not a lot. It's more about setting up the next steps.
I see. Prepping those pyruvate molecules for what's next.
Exactly. Next up is the transition reaction.
Okay, Act 2.
Those 2 pyruvates get moved into the mitochondria.
Right, into the powerhouses.
And they're transformed into acetyl-CoA.
Acetyl-CoA, that's a mouthful.
It's like the key that unlocks the next phase.
So it's important.
Very important.
All right, Act 3, the Krebs cycle. Tell me everything.
Okay. The Krebs cycle, also called the citric acid cycle, is where it gets interesting.
I'm ready.
It's a cycle, meaning the reactions happen in a circle.
Okay, makes sense.
And remember, we have 2 pyruvate molecules.
From the glucose splitting.
So this cycle happens twice.
Twice. So what exactly happens each time?
Well, acetyl-CoA enters the cycle.
Right, the key.
Joins with a 4-carbon molecule. Then they go through these changes and rearrangements.
Okay.
Some ATP is produced. But more importantly, high-energy electrons are loaded onto special carriers.
Wait, back up. High-energy electron.
Think of them like tiny packets of energy ready to be unleashed.
I see.
And these carriers, NADH and FADH2, they're like delivery trucks.
Delivering what?
Taking those electrons to the final stage.
Okay, so the Krebs cycle is setting things up for the grand finale.
Exactly. It's gathering those high-energy electrons for the electron transport chain.
The final act.
That's where those electrons will really make a difference.
All right, bring on the electron transport chain. What happens there?
Imagine a chain of proteins
embedded
in the mitochondria's membrane. They're like relay runners, passing those electrons along.
So those little delivery trucks.
Right. NADH and FADH2.
They drop off their cargo at the starting line.
Exactly.
Then what?
As the electrons are passed down, their energy is used to pump protons. Tiny positive charges across the membrane, creating this gradient.
Like a buildup of energy.
Exactly, like water behind a dam.
So how do we get our ATP from that? That's the whole point, right?
This is where the star comes in.
Oh.
An enzyme called ATP synthase.
ATP synthase, so it makes ATP.
Precisely. It acts like a turbine, spinning as those protons flow back across.
Powered by that gradient.
And as it spins, it smashes together ADP and phosphate, creating ATP.
Wow, so it's like a miniature power plant right inside our cells.
Exactly.
And that's where most of our ATP comes from.
The vast majority.
Incredible. You mentioned oxygen being crucial. Where does that fit in?
It's all about the electron transport chain.
Okay.
Oxygen is the final electron acceptor.
At the end of the chain.
Right. Without it, the whole thing backs up.
Like a traffic jam?
Those electrons have nowhere to go.
So we need to breathe.
Yes.
To provide that oxygen.
Just keep those electrons flowing.
I get it. So what happens when there isn't enough oxygen? Like if our cells need energy quickly?
Our bodies have a backup plan.
Oh.
It's called fermentation.
Fermentation? I thought that was for making, like, yogurt.
Well, it happens in our bodies, too.
Oh, really?
Especially in our muscles, when we push them hard.
Interesting. So like when I'm sprinting for the bus and can't catch my breath.
Exactly. Remember glycolysis, the first step?
Yeah.
It can happen with or without oxygen.
Okay.
So in fermentation, instead of going to the mitochondria,
pyruvate.
Right, it gets converted into something else.
Into what?
In our muscles, it's lactic acid.
Ah, lactic acid.
It gives us a burst of energy, but also causes that burning feeling.
So that's what that burn is. So fermentation is like an emergency generator.
A good way to put it.
But you're right. Fermentation is also used to make food, right?
Absolutely. We've used it for centuries.
Yeah.
Partnering with tiny organisms.
Like what?
Certain bacteria.
Okay.
And yeast.
Hey, things like that.
Well, we've got cheese, yogurt, of course, bread, beer.
All thanks to these tiny organisms.
It's amazing what they can do.
It is. So fermentation isn't just biology, it's a culinary art.
You could definitely say that.
And I remember reading about biofuels.
Yes.
We can actually make fuel from fermentation.
We can. Ethanol, which is produced during fermentation, can be used as fuel.
Wow. So we've got cellular respiration powering us.
Right.
Fermentation giving us food and maybe fuel.
It really highlights how interconnected everything is.
Absolutely.
Photosynthesis in plants captures energy from sunlight, stores it as glucose, and we unlock that energy.
Through cellular respiration.
It's a beautiful cycle.
It really is. This has been incredible. Can we go over some key points so far?
Of course. So cellular respiration turns glucose into usable energy.
ATP.
That's right. And it mainly happens in the mitochondria.
The powerhouses.
And it's got those 4 phases.
Glycolysis, transition reaction, Krebs cycle.
And the electron transport chain.
Where most of the ATP is made.
With the help of ATP synthase and oxygen.
We also learned about fermentation.
Right, our backup plan.
Which also gives us some tasty food and drinks.
And maybe fuel for the future.
It's amazing to think about all these tiny processes happening every second.
It really is.
Without us even knowing.
Keeping us alive and functioning.
I'm definitely feeling a deeper appreciation for cellular respiration.
Me too.
It's not just a textbook concept.
It's the foundation of life.
This has been a great deep dive so far.
I agree.
And we have more to come.
Definitely. We'll be back to explore even more fascinating aspects of cellular respiration.
So be sure to join us then.
We'll see you there.
Yeah.
It's amazing how these complex processes are happening inside of us, you know?
Right. It really makes you think about what else is going on in there.
Yeah, all the time.
So we've talked about the basics of cellular respiration.
That foundation.
But I'm curious, does it always happen at the same rate?
That's a good question.
Or can it speed up or slow down?
Well, just like a car engine, right? It can run at different speeds.
Depending on how much gas you give it.
Exactly.
I see the analogy.
Our sources talk about this student experiment.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
They designed it to see what affects the rate of respiration.
In those germinating seeds.
Right. They tested things like temperature and nutrients.
Okay, so did those things make a difference?
They did. Yeah. Higher temps generally led to faster respiration.
But just to a point, right?
Of course.
Our bodies have that ideal temperature range.
Exactly. And those enzymes involved have optimal temperatures too.
Makes sense. What about nutrients?
Well, glucose is the main fuel, right?
That's cellular respiration, yeah.
More glucose, faster process.
Okay.
Other nutrients matter too. Vitamins, minerals, things like that.
They help the enzymes function.
Exactly.
So it's all connected.
Very much so.
What about different organisms? Do they all have the same rate?
No, that varies a lot.
I guess it makes sense.
A tiny seed doesn't need as much energy as, say, a cheetah.
Right. Or even a hummingbird compared to, like, a sloth.
Exactly. And even within our bodies.
Different organs.
Yeah, different energy demands.
Our brains use a ton of energy, right?
They do.
Wow. So many factors influencing the rate.
It's a dynamic process.
You mentioned aerobic respiration.
Right, needing oxygen.
Is oxygen always necessary?
Actually, there's anaerobic respiration too.
Anaerobic. So no oxygen?
None. Certain bacteria, archaea.
They don't need oxygen at all.
They've evolved to live without it.
Look where.
Think about the bottom of the ocean, those hydrothermal vents.
Oh, wow. No oxygen down there.
No sunlight either.
But they can still do respiration.
They use other molecules instead of oxygen.
In the electron transport chain.
Right. Things like sulfate or nitrate.
To keep those electrons flowing.
Exactly. It's not as efficient, though.
Less ATP produced.
But it's essential for them to survive.
Life finds a way. So we've got aerobic, anaerobic.
Right.
And fermentation happens without oxygen too, right?
Good point. It's not just a backup. For some organisms, it's their main energy source.
Really? They just ferment all the time?
Essentially. Think about those bacteria and yeast we use for food.
Makes sense. Those are the real fermenters.
They're the pros.
You talked about cheese, yogurt.
Bread, beer.
What else?
Oh, sauerkraut, kimchi, pickles.
All fermentation.
It really shapes what we eat.
It's amazing.
And it's not just food.
Right, biofuels.
Using fermentation to make ethanol.
On a large scale.
Exactly.
There are challenges, I'm sure.
Of course, like the costs and the land use.
That's it.
It's a promising field.
So much potential.
Definitely.
This deep dive is incredible.
I'm enjoying it too.
We're learning about all these variations.
Aerobic, anaerobic, fermentation.
It's not just one process. It's a whole spectrum.
A range of strategies.
It's remarkable how life adapts.
It really is.
Finding ways to make energy no matter what.
With or without oxygen, using different molecules.
Fermenting away.
It's a testament to the resilience of life.
Absolutely. It makes you wonder what other secrets are out there waiting to be discovered.
There's always more to learn.
It really makes you wonder, right? What other things are happening?
All the time, yeah.
Right under our noses, so to speak.
We've only just scratched the surface.
We've been talking about cellular respiration as this standalone process.
Yeah, for simplicity's sake.
But it's not happening in isolation, is it?
Definitely not. It's all connected.
To other things going on in our bodies.
It's part of a whole metabolic network.
Like a city.
Yeah.
With different systems all working together.
I like that analogy.
So, what are some of the other pathways that cellular respiration interacts with?
Well, think about the different fuels our bodies use.
We have been focusing on glucose. But we also get energy from fats and proteins. Right?
Exactly. And those can be broken down, too.
Into what?
Into molecules that can enter the cellular respiration pathway.
At different points.
Right. Like fatty acids.
Yeah.
They can be broken down into acetyl-CoA.
Oh, right. The key to the Krebs cycle.
Exactly. And some amino acids from proteins.
Yeah.
They can be turned into pyruvate.
Or other molecules involved in respiration.
It's all very interconnected.
So bodies are flexible.
Very adaptable.
Using different fuels, all ending up in the same energy-producing pathway.
It's all about maintaining balance.
Homeostasis.
Our bodies are always adjusting, making sure we have enough ATP.
No matter what we're doing or eating.
Pretty impressive, right?
It really is. What are some areas of research that you're excited about when it comes to cellular respiration?
One that fascinates me is the link to aging.
Aging.
Yeah. As we get older, our mitochondria, those powerhouses, they don't work as well.
Well, they produce less ATP.
Exactly. And that can lead to health problems.
Makes sense.
But researchers are looking into ways to slow that decline.
Really? Like boost energy production in older adults?
That's the goal. Imagine the impact that could have.
It would be huge.
And there's research into using it to treat diseases.
Like what?
Cancer, for example.
Oh, wow.
Cancer cells have this weird way of making energy.
Different from healthy cells.
Yeah, they rely heavily on glycolysis.
Even when there's oxygen around.
Right. So researchers are trying to disrupt that.
To stop the cancer cells from getting energy.
It's all about targeting those differences.
Between healthy and diseased cells.
At the metabolic level.
This deep dive has been incredible.
I agree.
It's not just about how our bodies work.
It's about the potential for the future.
Improving health, treating diseases.
It's all connected.
This has been a really successful deep dive.
We've covered so much.
The basics, the connections, the future.
It's been a pleasure exploring this with you.
Likewise. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us.
We hope you've learned something new.
About this amazing process that keeps us going.
Every breath you take.
Every bite you eat.
It's all connected.
Until next time.
Keep diving deep.